One of the requests I got was, how do you teach a horse to start moving their shoulders under saddle? And I do teach that once I get on the horse, usually at the end of the first ride, but I started in groundwork even before all of that. I'm going to demonstrate on a broke horse kind of what I have it look like in the end on the ground. And then in the future, I'll get a colt that doesn't know how to do it, so I can show you how to work through the difficulties that a horse might give you when they're just learning. So before I ever even give a horse their first ride, there's a few points that I hit, and one of those points is disengaging their shoulders, especially if you're working. I mean, I like that kind of control on any horse, no matter the discipline, just having full body control, but especially like cow work type horses that you're gonna have doing rollbacks and stops and using their shoulders a lot. So what I like to do is I stand right about here and I get my reins at a length that I can pretty much the length up to their ear to eye. A lot of horses will pick their head up, especially when you're teaching a horse for the first time, and try and get it over your hand and resist the movement. And then I get my other hand and I put it over here on their shoulder. So my arms are about here and here. I like to ask the horse, of course, with no matter what I do, as light as possible, and then if they don't respond, get a little heavier on them. So I like to, some horses are really responsive and they'll do it just if you kind of tap the air like this. So I'll tap the air, and if the horse doesn't respond to me, this horse can be pretty lazy sometimes, and he hasn't done this in a long time as well. I'll give him a tap on the shoulder, and if he really isn't listening, I'll charge my body into his face. If you kind of run at a horse's face like that, they're gonna go, whoa, and try and get away from you. So I'm gonna bring this horse forward again. He took a step and moved his shoulders over. So I don't want him to move his butt end. I want him to move just his shoulders. So if you see him take a step over, imagine his feet are like this. If you see him take a step over like this, or even cross over himself, then you let him go and release. Of course, you always build on those baby steps. Anytime you get any type of desired response, even if it's little, you give them the release, and then you can build from there. So I'm gonna ask this horse again. If you want to add sound, you can. If he doesn't respond, I just gave him a little tap. This horse should know how to move away. So I asked light with my hands. He didn't answer, so I tapped him lightly, and then he really didn't respond, so I gave him a little harder one. I'm going to do it again, up by his shoulders here. And I teach them physically to touch and move their shoulders away with my physical hand. So right here, he's not responding, so I'm going to tap on his shoulders. This horse should know by now. So now I'm just being able to tap the air. And if you're on a colt, of course, the first time they're learning this, they're not going to go a full circle like that unless you really push them to. But you want to give them a reward earlier, so you don't ask that much. So I make sure I can do this on a horse on both sides. And when you're teaching this horse to do that, you're always keeping an eye on their feet, making sure they're being correct in their shoulders. And when you go on for a first ride, I do it physically with my foot. I set them up with their reins, and I'll show you how. So once I get a horse doing this successfully on the ground, let's see if I can get my fat butt up here anymore. This is a tall horse. I usually get a horse just to move forward on the first ride, or whenever you want to approach this, even if you have a really broke horse and you're just trying to teach shoulder control, you can do it then. But I usually do this at the end of a first ride. I get my horse moving forward, and then I soften them up at the end, and we end on an easier note. So I like to set my horse up. Say if I want to move my horse this direction, I get this inside rein and tip their eye just a little bit. It doesn't have to be intense, but just enough to where I can see their eye from where I'm sitting. Then I get this outside rein, and I'm going to push him. So I'm getting his head on a tilt just a little bit away from the direction where I want to go. Now that they know that shoulder placement, I get my outside foot and I touch that shoulder like we did on groundwork. So I'm going to direct his head and push his shoulder. And same thing, you do a light little tap, and if he doesn't respond, you go harder. On a colt that's learning it for the very first time, I'm going to go this direction now, so I'm going to tip his eye just a little bit. On a horse that's learning it for the very first time, they might move their back end around and not know how to move their shoulders. I just stay in there with my foot and try and ask lightly, and that first step, right when they take it, I release them. Let them sit there and think about it, and you always just build on that anytime you get the desired response. So a good way to kind of explain this more in depth too, if people don't understand what I'm doing with my feet and the pressure release, horses are moving away from pressure. So if you think, a good example I like to use, if you think of a door being opened and closed, say if I'm trying to get my horse to go this direction, remember I'm placing my head the direction he wants to go, and I'm gonna open my door. I'm gonna take this foot off of him so there's no pressure here. Think about a physical barrier of pressure, and think about a big ball sitting right here. It's an empty ball, right? Well, now I'm gonna get this closed door. There's an empty ball, empty alleyway, however you think about it, an empty space there. And I'm gonna get this closed door, which is this foot on this side, and I'm gonna close it. So I'm gonna open this side and push to close that door. I think that's a good way to kind of get people to understand how this horse is moving away from pressure. Like I said, I will get a horse that doesn't know how to do it and show you how to work through some of the problems that some horses might give you when trying to figure that out. So here's a colt that is very green, not very far along at all. One of the reasons, like I stated, I like to do this in the first ride after I lope is because in order to get any sort of movement out of the body, you want forward motion to be the root of that. You can't turn or do anything if you're not moving and going, quote unquote, what I like to call forward. So when you get more into advanced maneuvers in this, like if you want a horse to do a reining spin, there's a lot more drills you can do and different ways to approach that. But this is just the general control of how to get a horse to move their feet. So this is a horse, like I said, very, very green. Only done this a couple times. She's only a few rides in. But I'll explain and show you how it looks on this horse. So if I want her to move this direction, like I was talking, I make sure her eyes tipped in a little bit and just set her head up for it. Now I'm going to add this outside foot and wait for a little step. Right there, she gave me one and I released. You know, as you learn how that feels, you'll get better with your timing and release, but I like to do it, you know, both ways. If there's just one step over and the correct body control movement, I release. This horse is starting to figure it out with these couple rides, and so I'm able to be really, really light in my hands. And I like to give her breaks in between, like, you know, step, break, step, break. I don't add constant pressure because I want to make sure she gets that release. But anytime she does it correctly, I'll release her, and it doesn't have to be long because she's starting to figure it out now. And make sure, of course, you do it both ways. So right there, she didn't want to move her. She moved her butt end, and I didn't like that, so I kept asking until she moved her front end. When I was very first learning this, it was really hard for me to feel a horse's feet. I didn't know what I was even looking for. And you don't want to do this if your horse is really spooky because you don't want to freak him out or anything, but I literally had to look over my horse's shoulder, which that can also throw your horse off balance, and if your horse is spooky, it might freak him out. But you can practice it on a broke horse to feel what that feels like. You can literally just look over, hopefully this doesn't horse spook as it, and you can watch them move their feet and watch their back feet stay planted by looking over. So one of the reasons I like to, when I ride a horse for the first ride, if at all possible, and they're not just complete broncs or anything, and I try to do this in groundwork so I can set them up for success in the first ride. That's why when I ride them, I just stay off their head. I usually get my night latch because I'm a weenie baby and can't ride a bucking horse that well. And when I am trotting that horse around, I mean, I'm rubbing and I'm moving my legs around and I'm making sure that horse feels me all over him so I get those spooky spots out. Because a lot of times, if you get a colt going and you go to address this shoulder movement and they hadn't felt your foot up on that shoulder and you're not on the ground and they're not looking for it, you add that foot and that horse is going to spook out and run away, and usually it'll start a horse pretty good. So you just want to make sure that your horse knows that that foot can be touched there in the best way possible, and preventative measures before you try and approach this. And ask him to move. Usually they'll stick their head up in the air. There we go, he moves good. So I'll just give him that. So right here I'm going to ask. He's not really moving, so I'm tapping him on the head. He crossed that foot over, and so I'll give that to him. If you need to kind of tap on their face until they move that frame over, let them. Even if they kind of sidestep, it doesn't matter, as long as their physical feet in the front are moving away from you. If they do it correct, that's even better. If they want to move forward or back, that's what you have this hand, lead rope in this hand for, and you can move them. But really it's body position on where you stand. So if I stand way up here, they might just back up. If I stand way up back here by their shoulder, they might just run forward. So if your horse is moving one of those directions, you can use your lead rope and your body position to move them where you need. So I'm going to ask. He's not moving, so I might tap his face, and then he moves. The main problem I see when that happens is, like I said, either your horse walking forwards or backwards. This horse barely knows how to move. Or the horse picking its head up, trying to get it over your hand. This horse isn't doing it real bad, but if your horse does try that, just raise your hand with them until that horse goes. to bump your whole body into that horse to get them to move. You know, get as aggressive as you need to until they step away. Once they figure out what you're asking of them, of course, you don't have to use your whole body, and you don't even have to physically touch them. You can just use your bumps like this. There you go. He moved over, and I'll release him there. And you just build from there.